What comes to mind when you think of feminism? For the longest time growing up, I just assumed that feminism on paper was for all of us, but in action was represented by a select few. As I dug deeper in my research for both this paper and this video essay, I realized that I wasn't alone in this mentality. In fact, according to Dr. Patricia Hill Collins, because the media in the United States portrays feminism as a for whites only movement, and because many white women have accepted this view of American apartheid that leads to segregated institutions of all types, including feminist organizations, feminism is often viewed by both black and whites as the cultural property of white women. Now, throughout my findings, I have come to learn that this cultural fact is just the tip of the iceberg. Black women have long been overlooked in feminist history due to conflicting labels, harmful stereotypes, and divided priorities. This video is going to explore how these conflicts have shaped and challenged black feminist movements. In reality, there are millions of issues and obstacles that surround feminism and its failure to uplift black women. Nevertheless, seeing as I'm no expert and furthermore haven't spent years, if not decades, on these topics like my sources have, I've decided to break up my findings throughout this video into 5 key portions. But before all that, allow me to introduce myself.
She's back. Yeah.
Alright, so obviously the people that are going to be watching this video know me from class, but just to give a quick spiel on myself, my name is Madea B. Hill, and today, obviously I already mentioned through my very eloquent and super professional introduction, I'm going to be talking about black feminism and its overall trials and tribulations, particularly pertaining in Western society. Just sit back, relax, buckle up, because we're in for a treat. I put my foot in this. No health code violation. Okay, bye. Part 1. The battle over labels. Throughout my findings, I was able to discover that there are essentially 3 main types of feminism that black women tend to subscribe themselves to based off of the labels and the overall priorities of said versions. And to begin, the first one is black feminism, just basic laid out like that. Black feminist and theorist and activist Pearl Cleage defines it as the belief that women are full human beings capable of participation and leadership in the full range of human activities: intellectual, political, social, sexual, spiritual, and economic. Next is womanism. Womanism prioritizes women of color in general, so basically all women that encapsulates by POC, and basically tries to focus more on implementing how their intersectionality in regards to their race and cultural identity impact both their femininity and their feminist movement overall. Lastly, the one that is most popular amongst black nationalist groups of people would be Africana womanism. Its founder, Clenora Hudson Weems, essentially means that it's exclusively meant for black women / women of African descent only. It prioritizes our unique experiences and identities and is rooted in Afrocentrism. So this particular definition is, like I said, more so relatable to people who fall under like black nationalist categories, aka people who like to prioritize the black community and focusing on making black communities independent and solely reliant on themselves rather than seeking outside help. Now, while the labels are all good and well, the conflict essentially arises when the discussions and discourse over what we all as a unified front, as black women in general, universally should call our feminist movement. That's where the conflict came up, because essentially people were prioritizing the name over the progress. So essentially this kind of held us back, and it made it much harder for our progression and our overall movements to move forward, because internally we were so focused on what labels we wanted to be seen as, and we were focused on, we couldn't really come to an agreement as to what we as a whole wanted to prioritize, which of course isn't necessarily possible or realistic, because women are not a monolith. Each and every single one of us is individuals, and therefore what one person may prioritize versus the other is never going to necessarily be one. You feel me? As mentioned previously, feminism as an idea has been widely considered a privilege problem, reserved only for Western white women. This has become such an obstacle that are now studies testing the repercussions of this precise dilemma. One of those studies, conducted by Elisa D. Boisner, was published under the title Race and Women's Identity Development, distinguishing between feminism and womanism among black and white women. Now, it is important to note that although the conflict initially arose because of the discourse on how we as black women wanted to pick and choose our labels and what we should be defined as, those issues weren't necessarily like irrational, if that makes sense. Like they came from a real reason. And according to Alicia D. Boisner's research, as a result of her research across over 120 candidates of Black and white women specifically, she discovered the following patterns in her results. When measured, it was reported that when Black women had less negative racial pre-encounters in life, their self-esteem was higher, but the same measurement had little to no effect on white women. These findings are valuable to this overall research and topic because they clearly lay out how the differences in race and race-related experiences affect a woman's stance on feminism. And the reason why I chose to include this in this video today is because this is exactly why we were having conflicts with labels to begin with. So now fast forward decades and decades after slavery, Black women now find themselves with this newfound independence, particularly in the 70s and 80s, a little while after the civil rights movement had ended. Now that we've moved past this era of focusing just solely on Black people and Black men and prioritizing them, we're not trying to prioritize ourselves. And we want to be seen and we want to be heard. And as mentioned before, the problem with feminism flat out is that on paper it's meant to serve everybody, not just women but including men, but in reality it very rarely does that when it comes to Black women especially. Part 2, stereotypes and their lingering power. Unlike the avoidable harm that follows prolonged discourse over labels, there's still some caricatures that have followed Black women from the past with only harmful intentions in mind. Consequently, these stereotypes have burdened Black women for centuries, making it nearly impossible for Black women to truly explore their womanhood and individualism. Since the beginning of the Atlantic slave trade, Black women have had dozens of negative names and slurs hurled at them from both sport and reassurance of white slave owners, modern-day racists, and bigots. Despite the multitude of these horrid terms, they have all managed to fall under, yet again, 3 main stereotypes and tropes. The first of these tropes is well known, and it's used and has been used far more often in modern day media than people would like to admit, let alone think, and that is the mammy. Dating back all the way to the 50s and 60s, the most iconic and well-known representation of this character would be Hattie McDaniel's role in Gone with the Wind. So essentially what the mammy does is it characterizes Black women as being obese, unattractive, and extremely subservient. So essentially we are only there to serve white women and, take care of the children and tend to the house, and basically re-establishing and encouraging that idea and mindset that Black women are beneath white women in people and the rest of society in general. Now, one of the more iconic and recent examples of this stereotype would have to be the movie Precious. Of course, as we've seen in the film, there's this teenage girl who is clearly obese, who is in an abusive household, who has very subservient, shy, and submissive attributes and characteristics about her. She's been both sexually and physically and mentally abused. She's a teen mom. Movies like this essentially just reinforce that negative and really harmful ideal that this is all we amount to as Black women. And it's really disheartening. It's very frustrating. It's not cute. It's not funny. And although Precious was made in the early 2000s, she is definitely not the only example of this type of stereotype and caricature in the media in the 21st century, which is a problem. Like, girl, what? The next one is my personal least favorite. It's the sapphire. This is essentially the term that was coined to describe Black women as pretty much, ironically enough, the opposite of the mammy. She's aggressive, she's emasculating, she's masculine within herself, she is argumentative, she cannot be she cannot be tamed, essentially kind of defeminizing us and making us out to be these wild, aggressive beasts, so to speak, and overall trying to paint us out to be as undesirable. And this particular stereotype in and of itself is extremely harmful because it now forces a Black woman into a position where we cannot freely express our emotions. So let's say, for example, we've all felt this as women and people in general. You're in a workspace or a school environment and a superior, whether that's a teacher, a boss, whatever, is clearly being disrespectful and hurtful to you. And as Black women, instead of being able to, advocate for ourselves, we're immediately seen as aggressive. So this is also the stereotype and caricature that has created the term angry Black woman. It's basically a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, which is extremely inhumane because as human beings, we all have emotions, and especially when one is being disrespected or threatened or violated. How is it fair to demand and basically assume that one sole group of people should not, react? Like, that's... Now, lastly, this is the Jezebel. The stereotype in and of itself essentially is basically the over-sexualization of Black women. So again, you're gonna notice a pattern in these stereotypes, how they all kind of contradict themselves, but yet all manage to coexist at the same time. Anyways, so what the Jezebel essentially stands for is she's basically meant to describe a type of woman who is over-sexual, who's a seductress, she's only good for sex. She's basically known as a vamp, a sexual being. She has no other purpose other than to serve men sexually. And this specific term has especially affected us the most, as it dates back all the way back to the Atlantic slave trade, because it was originally used as justification for slave owners raping and sexually assaulting their Black female slaves. And it of course has been carried on since then throughout history as an excuse, as we've seen in the justice system, as we've seen in media coverage, as we've seen in films, music videos, etc., to justify the sexual harassment and the overall inhumanity of just dismissing the Black body as simply that, a Black body. So we're not human beings, we're not, women, we don't have thoughts, we don't have minds, we're just here for sex. Which, hopefully I don't have to spell this out for you, that's not okay. You understand? Okay. Now, as I've already stated when talking about the sapphire stereotype, all three of these traps us in this very strict and very confined societal pattern where, again, like I said, we're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't. These specific stereotypes in particular I really focused on heavily in my initial research because I wanted to understand both the history of why we were put in this position and also the types of societal behaviors and factors that are aiding and maintaining this societal mindset. So as you can see, like these music videos, these films, Precious, even Gone with the Wind, which is, although decades and decades old, is still being referenced today. All of these things negatively and aggressively impact the way we as Black women are seen, heard, or rather not heard, and overall treated. Dr. Keisha Warren Gordon and Deborah M. McMillan used the country Belize and their net citizens to experiment on the real-world consequences of these stereotypes. They decided to do a simple social experiment on Facebook community in Belize. They just upload an image of a Belizean rum ad titled Big Titty Rum that utilizes all three of the main stereotypes at the same time. And then on top of that, they decided to criticize it for its very obvious racist character and asked the net citizens what they thought should be done to fix it. After a total of 4 days, they received over 150 comments. Now, believe it or not, the majority of the comments they received, in essence, they just tried to gaslight both the doctors who conducted the study and the Black women and women in general in Belize who spoke out about this and agreed that these types of advertisements, especially in the year 2022, both the ad and the experiment were conducted in 2022. Go ahead and count. Yeah, very recent. And essentially what these net citizens for the most part tried to do was, like I said, they gaslit, they gatekeeped, they did not girl boss.
Big boobs? What? Child.
No, they didn't. As a matter of fact, there are a couple comments, I'll put them here on the screen, of men accusing the professors of being in need of a man in their life. People said that they were creating racism. They said that racism is a American only thing and it doesn't exist in Belize. Just all types of rah BS. And essentially the reason why I felt it was so important to include both the ad itself and the research and its findings is because this is the mindset that the majority of the population of a single country is having in 2022, and they still haven't. So the idea that racism is an American only problem and that it is not real and that those types of caricatures and that type of advertisement and behavior is appropriate is the exact reason why those women in police are going through what they're going through and why millions of other Black women around the world are going through what they're going through. There's even a report within these professors' research that states that for the most part, actual crime towards Black women is in this country is specifically like mishandled. Like I'm talking, it's in and out in 10 minutes or less. The courts do not care. The jury does not care. These women very rarely seek help because they very rarely get justice. That in and of itself is a major issue. If this is what we're seeing from a net citizen perspective alone, imagine what these women are going through in these streets. Living in that country. Like these are people who are having to deal with a 1950s level mindset and behavior in a world where Google exists, where access to the internet and research and data, all of this stuff I found, it is there. It's open and available. But then again, like I said, that choice of deliberate ignorance, that choice to continue these negative stereotypes and these harmful stereotypes does nothing other than put Black women in a position to be harmed, sexually assaulted, mistreated, and potentially killed, all of which is unfortunately happening in Belize and other places around the world. Part 3, misguided beliefs and divided movements. Similar to how the previous topic of labels can primarily be culpable to the Black woman's own discussions, the debates on whether we as Black people should prioritize more in our feminist agendas, race or gender, are just as problematic. As discussed in his essay, Gender, Activism, and the Illinois Black Panther Party, Jacoby Williams reflects on how the actions and recollections of famous party leaders like Fred Hampton and former members like Akua and Jerry, formerly Deborah Johnson, directly shaped the Black Panther Party history both in Illinois and across the country. To quickly contextualize, the Black Panther Party was originally founded by Huey P. Newton in the late October of 1966. The party was founded on the promises made to help uplift and protect Black communities through Black nationalist teachings and developing self-sufficient Black households without the help of outside races, specifically white people. Aside from their focus on self-defense, the party was well known for their free breakfast programs and prioritization of supporting underprivileged Black youth. Nevertheless, the party was still riddled with plenty of social issues and contradictions, the most prominent of those being the pervasive issue of sexism across chapters. Now, thankfully, the Illinois chapter specifically was much more progressive and forward-thinking than the rest of the chapters, which is why through Williams' essay he includes the fact that in Njeri's testimony as a former member of the Illinois chapter, she states how her and her fellow Black women didn't feel marginalized as Black Panther women in Chicago because of the forward-thinking of their former leaders like Fred Hampton. So just to quickly go over some of the things that Fred Hampton would do to make sure that Black women were being treated equally and with self-respect is if he did find out that somebody in the chapter was being sexually inappropriate or harassing or dismissive or sexist towards any Black woman, he would have that Black woman in particular point out who did it, and she would then have the man line up against the wall and she would get to whip him with a belt. And I don't know about y'all, but I like that.
That's a Black king right there.
Now, unfortunately, this very forward mindset couldn't protect the rest of the women around the country, as Fred Hampton was a very unique case because he prioritized gender inclusivity and, most importantly, equality, which meant that there were a lot of Black women in positions of power in that specific Illinois chapter and across Chicago, which is why Njeri in her testimony, of course, stated that they didn't feel marginalized because they weren't. And the reason why it was so difficult for his type of thinking to become pervasive across the chapters is because the initial founder of the overall Black Panther Party in general, Huey Newton, had a very male chauvinistic and sexist mindset, and he is quoted stating, "Black men were not real men unless they enforced patriarchy and male dominance in sexual and familial relationships." So he pretty much said, you're not a man if you're not forcing yourself on women, if you're not telling her who's boss. He pretty much encouraged some very abusive and sexist and sometimes sometimes some might even consider sexually abusive tactics and behaviors, which is why so many Black women across different Black Panther parties struggled the way they did. Now, aside from the very obvious prioritization in Illinois chapter of gender inclusivity, this wasn't one of the only issues that Black women faced in the Black Panther Party. One of the major issues that they ended up facing was having to choose between womanhood, motherhood, and being a Panther. So essentially what this meant was that even in the Illinois chapter, because they didn't have access to childcare, to eat, despite the free breakfasts and whatnot they were hosting, they were so busy having to, again, prioritize other people's kids and families that they weren't able to be mothers. And a lot of them unfortunately had to leave the party because they weren't able to spend time with their kids the way they would like, on top of having jobs and on top of being in the party. So it wasn't just the sexism and the chauvinism, obviously that was a big deal, that was keeping them from participating as much as they would have liked. It was also the fact that as women, especially women with families, there needs to be some sense, in order for this to be an equal system, in order for it to truly be a feminist environment, there needs to be resources for them so that they can do it all, so that their intersectionality and their individual situations don't hinder progress of the movement or even their personal lives. Unfortunately, it wasn't just male-enforced ideals that held us back on the journey to an oppression-free world. It was the idealization of one of Western literature's most influential minds, Zora Neale Hurston. Unlike the Black Panther Party and their issues with acknowledging gender oppression, the idealization of Hurston as being the one true spokesperson for Black femininity and oppression derives from a place of overwhelming agreement. Odd? Very. In Devin E. Clifton's journal article titled Rededication, Hurston, Black Object Thinking, and the Black Feminist Critical Enterprise, she explores how iconic thinking can be extremely harmful to the progression of Black feminism as a whole. The article essentially explains that when Black women and others idolize Hurston's work as the feminist gospel and one true Black female writer, they completely diminish the value of both Hurston's and other Black femme writers' work. This is an extreme problem for Black feminism, as it restricts the natural fluidity of both womanhood and feminist expression. Clifton argues that the best way to combat this is through Black object thinking. This is to say that just as Hurston expressed both herself and race in fluid methods and depictions, Black women and academics should approach these topics with the same level of open-mindedness. This type of forward thinking is crucial in the ushering in of future Black authors and artists, as it appreciates the past while still making way for the present. Now, I know some of y'all are probably thinking, Adia, what the hell? Like, so first you're saying that we're focusing too much on labels, now you're saying that that Black men are against us, now you're saying da 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 da. Stop. What I'm saying is that just like every other social and economic and whatever movement in humanity's history, there is always a gray area. There is no such thing as black and white. So the same way this type of iconic thinking that Devin Clifton is talking about in her paper is problematic, same can be said for the exact opposite of the spectrum, which is prioritizing not focusing on Black women's work, completely dismissing it. That is why as a society, we need to find ways to start finding the happy medium. So like she said, object thinking, looking at the bigger picture. You can't necessarily just describe one person as the spokesperson for an entire race. I shouldn't have to tell you in 2025, now that we've crossed that threshold, that is problematic, because honey, it is. Like I said, I've said it once, I'll say it again. Black women, Black people, human beings, we are not monoliths. It doesn't matter what type of society or community you're living in, you are your own person. Your personality is yours. Your experiences are yours. So the idea that as Black women we're either being mistreated by our own communities in the sense of having to have this ultimatum of choosing between our gender oppression and our race versus the idea of the exact opposite of that spectrum, which is prioritizing our gender oppression and representation in media, but only through one person, we need to find the middle. You know what I'm saying? That's the main premise of what I'm trying to talk about with you guys here today, is finding that gray area, finding that happy medium. Part 4, unsung heroes and community support. Moving past all of that, there's still the matter of discussing the positives that have developed from Black feminism and how we as both Black women and people have treated them. Similar to the aspect of racial exclusion in traditional feminism I talked about at the very beginning of this video, many people tend to see feminist icons as women who primarily hold roles in male-dominated spaces. This is to say that unless she is a politician, tradesperson, big CEO, or any other traditionally well-respected career woman, her success isn't always as highlighted as her peers. For instance, it is a common known theme among amongst Western media that sorority girls are seen as bimbos and often clueless blondes that only care about frat boys and getting blackout drunk. However, for black women in Divine Nines, historically black Greek organizations, this trope couldn't be farther from the truth. Dating all the way back to the year 1908, on Howard University's campus, 20 brilliant young women came together to create the first ever black sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. The founders' names were Ethel Hedgeman Lyle, Beulah and Lily Burke, Margaret Flagg Holmes, Marjorie Hill, Lucy Diggs Slowe, Mary Wolfo Taylor, Anna Easter Brown, Lavinia Norman, Norma Boyd, Ethel Jones Mowbray, Alice Murray, Sarah Merriweather, Joanna Berry, Carrie Snowden, Harriet Terry, Nellie Mae Quander, Minnie Beatrice Smith, Julia Evangeline Brooks, and Nellie Pratt, also known as the 20 Pearls. At its core, the purpose of AKA Incorporated has always been to unite college-trained African American women and provide service to their communities, as their motto goes, by culture and by merit. Despite the risks these women took to create the sisterhood and the many trailblazers it has formed, their names are often left slipping through the cracks of history. Now, what many people fail to realize about this sorority specifically is that many of its members are some of history's, specifically black history's, biggest names. People like Coretta Scott King, Rosa Parks, Kamala Harris, Katherine Global Johnson, Maya Angelou, the list goes on and on. We're all members of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, and those of them that are still alive still are. It's a lifelong membership, for those of you that didn't know. And while it's obvious that these women could have been successful without the help of this sorority, and they could have achieved all of the great feats that they have and did without the help of Alpha Kappa Sorority Incorporated, many of them have already been seen on and off the record stating that it is because of the sisterhood in the community and the support that they got from being a part of AKA and being a part of that sorority that helped them get to where they are, and help them with networking, help them with support systems. It helped them just in general along the way. And I feel like a lot of times in history, people tend to overlook that aspect when it comes to black feminism and black history, because like I said, there's this negative stigma surrounding sororities and surrounding unconventional, even though
women in predominantly male fields used to be unconventional,
type environments as not being true feminism, when in fact feminism is, going back to object thinking, whatever you make it.
You need to leave!
People can act out their feminist beliefs and they can, be trailblazers for feminism without having to be a tradesperson, without having to do jobs that are considered hypermasculine. Feminism, and at its core, is simply existing. In spite of all that, the fact that you exist and that you succeed, that is at its core what feminism and what black feminism is all about, which is why it's so important to know the impact that this sorority and black sororities like it and these unconventional feminist trailblazers and communities had, because they are important and they shouldn't be overlooked. Part 5, looking forward, intersectionality and Afrofuturism. In defiance to the formerly mentioned conflicts surrounding black feminism and womanhood, many black women in their communities have recently expressed a newer and evolving perspective on how to support black feminism, Afrofuturism, and intersectionality in general. Helping to explain these findings, Timothy Williams discusses in his brief essay titled The Evolution of Black Feminism, Womanism, Africana Womanism, and Afrofuturism that at its core, Afrofuturism is a philosophy that discovers the art and beauty of the black diaspora. Quick context, the black diaspora is used to encompass all black people from around the world and their many countries and regions. The main goal of Afrofuturism is to make it possible for black bodies and minds to exist within our cultures without harm or influence from outside sources. This is important because it reinforces the blame on the deeply rooted systemically racist systems of Western society. This way, instead of black people constantly blaming each other or one gender against the next, the focus is on prioritizing the intersectionality that encompasses the very existence of what it means to be black and a woman. How will this work? Let's find out. To address the elephant in the room? No. This solution does not work with one single method, nor does it thrive beneath a hierarchical system of power. No, the way Afrofuturism and black feminism will thrive is simple: teamwork. This means that we all must set aside our pride, prejudice, bias, and differences in order to achieve the world we've dreamed of. Similar to the gray area discussed previously in this essay, futurism works the exact same. As a community, we must become comfortable with the many ways our peers choose to express themselves and advocate for each other. The idea that only one way is the right way will forever keep us from our goal. Gender oppression is complex, and so is the path to dismissing it. While there is no exact playbook on how to abolish racism, sexism, or gender oppression, there has always been the option to join forces with our neighbors and give platforms to those without. As human beings, regardless of the systemic powers at play, it is our job to uplift and support our female Black artists, mothers, workers, leaders, followers, and those who are still in the dark. When one of us wins, we all win.